The Philadelphia Eagles made it all the way to the Super Bowl during the 2022 season and have been spiraling downward since their 10-1 start during the 2023 season. They are 2-2 on the year as they enter their Week 5 bye with far more questions than answers. They've put up just 52 total points over their last 3 games, and the promising future the Eagles once looked to have is slowly withering away. There's a lot of questions around the future of Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia, and anytime you have questions about a head coach's future, that's usually the start to the end. This was a take from a subscriber, and in today's video we will be responding to takes that were sent in earlier this week. We will do a few of these over the course of the season, and they are posted in the community tab, so be on the lookout for a chance to be featured in an upcoming video. This is a series continued from last year called Your Take Not Mine, and without further ado, let's begin! Sean McDermott should be let go if the Buffalo Bills do not win the Super Bowl this year is a take from Live 4 Hillside. Now, the Buffalo Bills have been one of the most successful NFL franchises over the past 5 years, and there's a reason for that. They are a really well-run organization, and there's a reason they go to the playoffs every year and have a chance to go to the Super Bowl year in and year out. Obviously, Josh Allen plays a part in this, but Sean McDermott is a great head coach and is very good at what he does. There's a couple of different types of head coaches, as not every head coach is created equal, and each coach has different responsibilities within the organization. Some head coaches like Andy Reid and Kevin O'Connell call offensive plays, while others like Sean McDermott and John Harbaugh lead from a CEO type approach and do not call plays on either side of the football. That is a really watered down answer as to what each coach's responsibilities are, but the point is, the Bills have had a lot of success over the last few years due in large part to McDermott. And I know the cliche answer is to say, well, they haven't been to a Super Bowl and Cincinnati has, so coaching must be a problem. And I don't like that argument because there's a lot of context within that. Just for Cincinnati to get to one Super Bowl, it required one of the worst halves of Patrick Mahomes' career, and it required a blown double-digit lead from Kansas City, which almost never happens. It really is unfortunate Buffalo is a great team in the middle of a dynasty, and that Kansas City is the roadblock in their way. Buffalo is a great team. Kansas City is an elite team, and this whole idea of Sean McDermott being let go because of Buffalo not winning the Super Bowl, to me is not one I agree with, assuming they make the playoffs again and are a tough out in January. They were down a couple of big defensive starters against Baltimore, and I don't think Baltimore is 25 points better than Buffalo. Granted, they were in Week 4, but if these teams play again, I think it would be much closer the second time around. I would also counter and ask, if they get rid of McDermott, what head coach is going to be better than him, and does the result change? I don't think it does, and obviously the 2021 playoff loss stung the most, but they had a lot going on during the 2022 postseason, whether it was the Damar Hamlin incident occurring just a few weeks prior to the playoffs, or even Von Miller tearing his ACL, who was a great player for Buffalo that year pre-injury, and even earlier in the year, they played a game in Detroit because they had several feet of snow dump in Buffalo, and it was a long year for the Bills. Losing at home to Kansas City in 2023 stung, but should Sean McDermott be fired for losing by a field goal at home to, again, a literal dynasty? I don't think so. Now, if you want to have this conversation about Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, with how slow of a start to the year they have every year, and with how the locker room is handled at times, despite Taylor having been to a Super Bowl whereas McDermott hasn't, I think there's more of a conversation with Zach Taylor than I do with Sean McDermott. The Chargers will be picking in the top 5 of next year's draft is a take from Yeager all day, and it's one I disagree with. The Chargers are now 2-2 on the year after back-to-back losses to the Steelers and Chiefs, and within each of those games, they managed to put up just 10 points. There's a couple of reasons I disagree with this take, but the main reason is because of Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter has coached under both Jim and John Harbaugh, and when you think of the big defensive minds in football right now, you probably think of guys that are hot, like Brian Flores, Steve Spagnuolo, and Mike McDonald. And I know the Lions just put up 42 on the Seahawks, but there were a lot of defensive starters out for Seattle, and I think they will be fine. My point is, Jesse Minter is one of the smartest defensive minds in football, and I think there's going to be several games down the stretch that the Chargers win, not because they put up 27 or more points, but because they hold their opponent to 17 or less. The Chargers defense is really good, and they only allowed 50 points through the first 4 games. I know they played the Bryce Young Panthers in one of the games, and since we are only a quarter of the way through the season, that is a quarter of the sample size, but I think there's a reason this team hasn't allowed more than 20 points in any of the first 4 games. And for the Chargers to be selecting in the top 5 of the 2025 NFL Draft, I think they'd have to win 6 games or less, and to be completely honest, I think 5 wins would be the maximum they could win, and they have a lot of winnable games off of their Week 5 bye. I don't worry about Bo Nix tearing this defense apart in Week 6, and the Cardinals' defense has been disappointing to start the year too. At minimum, I think they will split those first 2 games off the bye, but I do think winning both of those and starting 4-2 is realistic. At that point, that would require the Chargers to go 1-10 in their final 11 games, or even 0-11, and I don't think that's what's going to happen. I also think it is worth noting the Chargers were down several players against the Chiefs, including a former All-Pro in Rashawn Slater, and a guy who I think has a very bright future ahead of him in Joe Alt, as well as Derwin James getting suspended and Joey Bosa too. They only allowed 17 points to the Chiefs, and I think they will win several games down the stretch of the 24 season. To be completely honest, I think the Chargers are more likely to make the playoffs than they are to finish with a top 5 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. They finished the year with a 3-game stretch of home against the Broncos, at the Patriots, and at the Raiders, and if LA is 7-7 heading into those games, I think there's a very good chance they could finish 10-7 and make the playoffs in their first year under Jim Harbaugh. Truly, the only way I could see this team finishing with a top 5 pick is if they have season-ending injury after season-ending injury. I am a big Jim Harbaugh believer, and I think he will prove to be a great head coach for the Chargers and play a big part in them being a legitimate rival with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Washington Commanders will win the NFC East in 2024 is a take I never would have thought was possible heading into the season, but it is now not only possible, but realistic. The Commanders are off to a 3-1 start, and I think they can beat Cleveland in Week 5 to improve to 4-1. I have been genuinely impressed with what Cliff Kingsbury is dialing up offensively, and I don't worry about the Commanders' offense. And to be honest, I thought there was going to be a pretty substantial transition phase for Jaden, especially behind a not great offensive line, but he's been terrific, and the Commanders' offense is light years beyond where I thought they would be a month into the season. I don't think the Giants are going to win the East, though I think they look better than what people initially thought they were going to be too. Philly has a lot of problems, and I thought that would be ironed out this year, or at least not be a continuation of what we saw down the stretch of the 23 season, and I thought it would be a fresh start for everyone, but it's been bad. Jalen Hurts is routinely putting the ball in harm's way, and I think in some ways it's a miracle he only has 4 interceptions in 4 games. If he continues to play the way he has, then I expect that number to increase by a lot. And because of this and the defense, I don't think Philly is going to win the division either. So to me at this point, it's kind of a 2-team race between Washington and Dallas kind of scares me with how one-dimensional they are. Dallas also has an incredibly tough schedule coming up, and I think they're a 10 or 11 win team maximum. If I had to choose right now, I think I would choose Dallas because I don't trust Washington's defense, but it's certainly not an egregious take. The other part of Trayvon's take was a 2018 quarterback draft class conference championship Sunday, which would mean games between the Bills and Ravens and Buccaneers and Vikings for a chance to go to the Super Bowl. As much as I love Lamar, the drop-off in his performance in the postseason is notable. Lamar has just 6 passing touchdowns and 6 interceptions in 6 games, and has an additional 3 rushing touchdowns. The Ravens have been held to 20 points or less 4 times during the Lamar Jackson era in the postseason, and they've scored 20 or more points just twice. Lamar's completion percentage also drops from 64.6% to just 57.4%, and his pass rating goes from 98.2 down to 75.7. I also think 2023 was the Ravens' best chance to win a Super Bowl in this couple of year run. I know the Ravens just killed the Bills with a score of 35-10, but the reality is, if these teams are going to make the conference championship, one of them will have to go through Kansas City, and I don't think that would happen. On the NFC side, I think the Bucs are a very, very good team, and I am willing to exclude an outlier game against the Broncos, who have a really underrated defense, by the way. They also had a few injuries along the offensive line in that game. The one team that I think would mess this up for either Tampa or Minnesota when the playoffs roll around is the Detroit Lions. whether Minnesota goes to Detroit or whatever the case may be, I think the Lions are going to the Super Bowl from the NFC, which would prevent the 2018 draft class championship Sunday. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm making a mistake by saying that, like another famous 2018 draftee once said, but I think Kansas City and Detroit will find their way to the conference championship game. The Eagles' Super Bowl appearance in 2022 was a fluke, and then over reach highs like that again with Jalen Hurts is a take from username President's Dead, and I'd like to provide a little bit of context with the Eagles' 2022 Super Bowl appearance. There were a lot of things that went the Eagles' way that year. They had a really good pass rush. They, of course, had a really high-powered offense led by Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and, of course, Devontae Smith. And also they had 2 Hall of Famers along the offensive line in Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson. And they had a perfect blend of being able to dominate in the trenches while also facing a lot of teams that year that simply weren't even like top 3 or 4, but a lot of those teams in the trenches that year weren't great. And there were a lot of games where the Eagles flat out said, like, we are the bigger team, we're the big boys here, go ahead and try and stop us. And that was how they won a lot of games. And then there were a couple of games, like the Steelers game in particular, where they basically said, we're going to throw the ball to Arthur Juan, go ahead and try and stop us. And they won 14 games that year. And even in the playoffs, that goes back to the schedule and them getting favored even more. I mean, not the schedule, but the seeding, if you will. Daniel Jones and the Giants went into Minnesota and beat the Vikings that year in the wild card round, and they absolutely embarrassed the Giants the following week to the tune of a 38-7 victory. Also, it was also ironic that they beat the Giants in the divisional round 38-7, and on that day, 5 years prior, they beat the Vikings 38-7 in the NFC Championship game. I know Eagles fans would probably want that noted, so we'll go ahead and note that. But even in the following week, how many times are you going to, let's just call this what it is. How many times are you going to actually get to play a rookie quarterback in a conference championship game? And I will say this, I know Brock Purdy got hurt in that game, we all remember that, but I don't think a rookie quarterback was going into the link in the playoffs and winning. Now, obviously, the way that game played out favored the Eagles with Brock Purdy going down just from a competitive standpoint. Anytime a starting quarterback goes down, it's naturally going to favor the other team in terms of who wins that game, especially when it's a do or die situation. And when you have all of those things kind of just wrap up into one, a not difficult schedule, I mean, playing Daniel Jones and a rookie Brock Purdy, and then even Josh Johnson coming in and playing, and then even Brock Purdy again because Josh Johnson got hurt, and then at a point where Brock can only hand the ball off because he literally can't throw the ball. That was just such a recipe for the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl. And to say that they're never going to go to the Super Bowl again in Jalen Hurts' career is very loaded. Jalen is only 26 years old, but the reality is if you're going to sit here and say, man, this team is not going to win the Super Bowl this year, or this team is not going to get to the Super Bowl, obviously, given that there's only 2 teams that can go to the Super Bowl, 1 team that can win the Super Bowl, you're going to be right more often than not. And it also helps when there's a literal dynasty in the NFL right now in the Kansas City Chiefs. So I feel like I would agree with this take in the sense of I don't think the Eagles are going to go back to the Super Bowl, because when you look at the next few years, or just think about the next few years in the NFC, the Commanders look really good. The Lions are here now, and they're going to be a really difficult team to beat, and I don't think the Eagles would beat the Lions with the season on the line. And with the way the Commanders are going, I mean, that's going to sound crazy, but they're going to be a really good team. Dallas is still going to have a really high floor with both Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, and even Micah Parsons when they extend him. And I know Dallas's team isn't, Super Bowl caliber, but they're not a bad team either, and they're a team that Philly's going to have to beat just to win the division. So I would agree with this take strictly from the sense of how hard it is to go back to the Super Bowl, and that, again, you are more likely to be right by saying this team or that team is not going to go to the Super Bowl. You're just, statistically, you are going to be right more often than you're not. There are a couple of extra takes that I wanted to specifically dive into, and this one kind of goes off of this. This is from Justin Ziegler. Justin said the Philadelphia Eagles will be sellers at the deadline, and around that time, Nick Sirianni will be fired, and that Kellen Moore will take over for the rest of the year. So I wanted to kind of rope that into one because there were a lot of Eagles takes within the community post, and I think Nick Sirianni will be fired at the latest at season's end. Now, right now the Eagles are 2-2. They weren't even close to being healthy when they played the Bucs in week 4. So I don't think it's really fair to judge the Eagles based on week 4, although that was a disappointing game defensively, not offensively, offensively, but also defensively. And I don't think Nick Sirianni's the guy. And I think there's going to be a point where they basically say, all right, Nick, you are clearly not the reason for our success. You're clearly not going to be the guy in the long run, so I think they will cut ties sooner rather than later. I don't know about midseason, but I think there may be a point where the Eagles are maybe 6-6, maybe on the verge of making the playoffs, and I think they may look back and maybe think there's a game or two that they should have won, that if they're 6-6, they could have been 8-4, and they may look to move on from Sirianni at that point, but I do think at the latest, Sirianni will be gone at season's end. Now, another take from Charlotte Corday, the Panthers trade Bryce Young to another team and shows the world he was worth the first pick. So I'm going to disagree with this take only because no matter what Bryce Young does the rest of his career, I mean, unless he has just a Hall of Fame caliber career from here on out, which I don't think is going to happen. He's always going to be compared to CJ Stroud no matter what. And that's not exactly fair to Bryce Young at this point. Now, was Bryce dealt a bad hand, especially in his rookie year, with a poor offensive line, with a head coach that was fired 11 games into the season after they started 1-10, and a team that could flat out not run the football to help their rookie quarterback? Yes, all of those things may be true, and it also is true that Bryce was a problem in year 2. Now, with how young Bryce is, and with the fact that I think he was a really, really great quarterback at Alabama, I still think there is talent there. I think Bryce has the potential to, not Sam Darnold necessarily, and that would even be like 5 years from now, and you can't predict anything in the NFL 2 years from now, let alone 5 years from now, but if Bryce Young goes to a situation where he is developed and he's nurtured and teams are patient with him, and it's not basically, hey buddy, you're the number 1 pick in front of CJ Stroud, I need you to produce right now, and if you don't, we're fired and you're going down with us, then that situation would be a lot more ideal than what he's had in Carolina from the start. I still think there's potential there with Bryce Young. I just refuse to believe that this player that was so good and so dominant in the SEC for multiple years, I mean, he was a Heisman winner, he was a great player during his final year, that all of a sudden, just snap of a finger, that he's not a good player anymore. I mean, he was, at Alabama, he was a really, really good player, and he showed flashes of Drew Brees being able to, win the game with his mind. And the fact that we didn't see that during his time in Carolina, or during his starting time in Carolina, is very frustrating, but I think if he has kind of a year to reset, that maybe 2 or 3 years from now, maybe there's still something there. But from the first pick aspect, I do disagree with that, just because the comparisons are always going to be there, and that's not going to be something Bryce Young is unfortunately ever going to be able to live down. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 33% of people watching are subscribed, and helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.